What's the intention behind NHI and the biggest barriers to the implementation of it?
Well, I think the intention is, first of all, to, as government has stated, make sure that we can achieve universal health coverage. They will feel that, no man, what is being provided now in the public sector is, what's the point of me paying twice for a service that I already can get?
What are the tangible impacts of the BRICS Business Council?
The possibility for far much more jobs in the country.
Welcome back to Palatable Politics, a show where we take the complexity out of politics and make it palatable for you. With me, your host, TJ Maslela. Welcome to the show. In today's session, we're going to be discussing BRICS from a business perspective, the NHI also from a business perspective. And here to give us insight is none other than a former DG of Health, DG of DIRCO, a current executive at Discovery, Dr Ayanda Ntsaluba. Welcome to the show.
Excellent, TJ.
Give us a bit of a brief as to who you are, your journey.
Well, I mean, I come from the Eastern Cape first, and I'm a medical doctor. After completing medicine, worked for about 3 years, then went into exile. In Angola, Zambia, Tanzania, Uganda, and also got an opportunity to go to Party School in the Soviet Union then. Just before we came back, offered a scholarship by the ANC as part of preparing for the post-apartheid period. So spent some time at the London School of Economics doing health policy.
What year was that where they started
1990.
preparing? Okay.
Just around after the release of Madiba, when it became clear now we're just about to. So I spent the first year after Madiba's release in London, came back. Then I actually wanted to complete my dream, which was to specialize in obstetrics and gynae. So I went back to King Edward. But so during the week I was in King Edward, and virtually every weekend I was in Joburg at Shell House. And we were part of a team that was working on the future ANC health policy, obviously with the benefit now of what I had learned at the London School of Economics and London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So in 1995, I then formally joined Department of Health then under Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and Nkosazana invited me to join her team. I was then Deputy Director General for Policy and Planning, which was easier for me because in a sense it was far much now about implementing what we'd been working on just before the elections. And then in 1998, my boss, Olive Shisana then, was the Director General, got a job at the World Health Organization. So hardly 3 years of being in the department, I was asked to then move to the position of the Director General. So I was in Director General of Health for 1998 to 2003. The end of my 5-year contract, I moved to DIRCO, where I spent about 8 years until 2011. And then 2011, I then left public service and went to join Discovery. But I must say, actually, I remained very closely connected with a lot of work in government. So I was asked to serve in the South African Tourism Board, which I did. I chaired the trust of the South African National AIDS Council for a number of years. And I think one of the most rewarding periods during this period, actually, I was part of the team from the business side that worked very collaboratively with the Department of Health during the COVID. So virtually during that period, 95% of my time was with the colleagues from the Department of Health. So that's who I am. As you've indicated, TJ, maybe I should mention this. About 5 years ago, I was then asked also to be part of the 5-member BRICS Business Council. It's a 3-year term, which was then renewed again by Minister Patel. So we're still in the second term now.
Yeah, all right. So now BRICS, last year during the summit, we saw the expansion of BRICS to include the 4 new states. How do you think that's going to impact us as SA?
Well, first of all, I think just strategically, I think the expansion of BRICS is a good thing from two dimensions. First of all, it's a demonstration of the growing influence and the yearning basically for greater multipolarity in the world. The second thing is that obviously a number of these countries have some economic might and in fact hold the key to some strategic assets that drive global economy. So to be with them in BRICS, looked at from that perspective, is good. It's not without its own complications, because obviously in BRICS there would always be some differences. For example, the striking difference would be the existing tensions between China and India around territory around the Himalayas. But that's never something that I think the force that pulls us together to speak with one voice in the multilateral environment always made those not to show up. Essentially, what you've done now is that with the expansion, you've brought in countries that have got their own dynamics, and so managing those, for example, you've got Saudi Arabia and Iran, and they've got their own tensions. You've got in the African continent, Ethiopia, Egypt, they've got their tensions around the water and the dam. So I think it's going to be a far much more complex environment, but the silver lining in it is probably it will be a manifestation if BRICS manage to hold it together. It will be a manifestation of the importance and the possibilities of having diverse views on some issues, but being able to pull together on some of the critical issues, which is really what the global environment requires. We don't have to agree ideologically, we don't have to agree on everything, but there are certain things: protection of the environment, battle against hunger, battle against inequality, trying to make our world a far much more peaceful place. Those things we should be able to work on across the divides. And finally, for South Africa, to the extent that we're the single African country in BRICS until the expansion, so our position was always not just advancing South Africa's interests, but also to advance the interests of the continent. That's going to be a contested space in a sense, because Ethiopia and Egypt would also be stepping up the plate. But I'm saying contested space on the surface, but it also holds the promise that if we find a way as the three countries to coordinate, to speak with one voice, then we could amplify the voice and place of Africa and leveraging the benefits in BRICS. So that's why, TJ, I'm saying it's in the main a good thing, but it will require greater sophistication in our diplomacy. It requires us to understand some of the risks that are inherent and basically grow up in terms of understanding how we are going to navigate through some of those contradictions.
So one of the intentions behind the formation of BRICS was to change the world order. How far is the expansion going in terms of dealing with that?
My view is that the expansion is to a large extent, I think it is a positive signal in that direction, because it entrenches, as I say, the issue of multipolarity, which is key. And secondly, it amplifies the voices that can, in a sense, collectively hold some of the powers to greater accountability. The thing that we must avoid nonetheless, because it will not help in the reform of the global, we must not see BRICS as a ganging up of people who are anti some other countries. Okay. I think we should resist that temptation. Let BRICS be far much more an expression of the yearning for a far much more open, more inclusive global multilateral system. And I think the presence of countries like India, Brazil, which themselves, quite frankly, given their geostrategic location, the size of their populations, And basically the strength of their economies, I think is going to make their non-representation in key decision making all the more. Now, even in the continent, I think in the continent it's just a big debate about what's the configuration of countries that will represent the continent. But I think it's a completely unsustainable position that we're in now. And I think that the changes are going to gain momentum, in my view.
The currency aspect. What is the intention behind that and the progress?
You know, TJ, I've heard people, I think that the dominant thinking within BRICS, I know this thing is sometimes framed as a BRICS currency. Now, because of the diversities of the economies in BRICS, I think the shared view is that talking about the BRICS currency per se is premature, because if you just have to figure out the differences amongst the countries in terms from a economic strength point of view. But what in BRICS is indisputably a positive stand that ultimately might lead to that is basically the strong push around trading in our own currencies. And obviously, and I think trading in our own currencies has the intended effect, actually, because I don't think it's unintended. It's an intended effect of reducing the dominance of the dollar. That's the path we're going to have to travel first and entrench that path before we start thinking about forming a single BRICS currency. Currently, as I understand, basically our reserve banks, our major economic, and then some research institutions are cautioning that probably that might be too premature to think about that. And certainly South African position is precisely that. But encouraging, for example, already we're getting money from the BRICS Bank, which is rent denominated. And so that is the direction that we need to move on, because then it cushions the countries from the vagaries of basically a fluctuation of their currencies, and therefore make planning far much easier.
You mentioned the issue of tensions between the different states and having to find a way to find a middle ground without one compromising too much. How do we avoid that? I mean, because one would say, okay, Brazil have an excess of chickens, and if they dump here, that adversely affects our poultry industry. So how do you find a middle ground where there isn't a loser or a winner? Okay, a winner, yes, but there isn't a loser.
You know, one of the important things, I mean, South Africa, one of the two key achievements of South Africa is that although we joined the BRICS last, at least of the founding members, 10 years ago in 2013, when we hosted BRICS in Durban, we pushed hard, very hard, for the establishment of the BRICS Business Council. We're celebrating the 10 years of the BRICS Business Council last year when we hosted. But one of the things that we made it our agenda is to basically establish a trade and investment working group within that. And the main function of the trade and investment working group is actually keep on highlighting to all the BRICS member countries, have a transparent mechanism of demonstrating the flows of trade. Because at the present time, if you take South Africa, for example, our trade with India and Brazil has increased significantly through our membership of BRICS. But unfortunately, it is not balanced. And also the structure of the trade is something that's not sustainable, because we export raw materials and we import finished goods. If you look at our relationship with Brazil, then our goods are subject to all sorts of non-tariff barriers in Brazil. And so we thought, instead of trying to argue item by item, let's have a principled position that actually says there are going to be trade-offs here, but in the main, we must aim for a world where there's far much more equity and the trade is far much more balanced. And that working group, which I think was a very important achievement, because its establishment, its terms of reference, was endorsed by the heads of state. it basically is a data-driven. It just presents facts as they are, so you can't deny the facts. And it allows the countries also to work from a common template, which is why actually the Chinese Chinese colleagues sent a very big delegation just before BRICS. Because when they saw what was there, they sent a trade delegation about 2-3 weeks before the summit, which was basically a buying mission to South Africa. Okay. Because one of the things that they were sensitive about is when they looked at the stats, they said, this is not, it's not presenting China in a good way with respect to South Africa. And so I think that was a big achievement. And I think if we are rigorous, one of the things that we've done in the BRICS Business Council now is to encourage some young guys, quite impressive. We've pulled people like Tapelo Tselapedi, who's done work on BRICS. He's at Rhodes. He's pulled in other people, young people who've worked on BRICS. And we're trying to create basically a bit of an intellectual, research-driven understanding that shapes our constant intervention, so that the BRICS Business Council and the apex bodies in South Africa actually don't just look at experience of individual companies, because companies are capable of doing that, but look at the macro trend. And for us, I think that's one of the legacies we want to leave behind, so that we have an institutional mechanism that supports any future councils that come in, that is data-driven, young South Africans, because also about picking up young South African academics is because you then begin to build a core of people who understand exactly strategically what South Africa is trying to get, because the partnership in BRICS is a long-term project, and it's very important for our country.
What tangible evidence would you say, or would you give, of what the BRICS Business Council has achieved since its inauguration?
I think the trade between South Africa and particularly China and India significantly has increased, multiples. So there's no question about that business-to-business relationship. Remember, BRICS operates on the basis that the governments create the political environment, then business people have to move on. But the second, to me, the signal development, again, South Africa was critical in that, was the establishment of the BRICS Bank. That was an idea driven largely from South Africa. South Africa, of course, we were over-ambitious. We thought we could host the BRICS Bank here, and it was a battle some of us knew we would lose. I think it is okay, based in Shanghai.
It was worth a try.
It was worth a try. And then, of course, we then agreed now on regional subsidiaries of the bank, and one of them for Africa is located in South Africa. Now, whether it was in COVID or, for example, as we went through the energy, we suddenly have diversified our sources of funding to help us deal with those national. I mean, if you recall, we no longer just now have to only go to the IMF or the World Bank for a significant part of our response has been funded through the BRICS Bank. If you add to that the fact that increasingly those loans are going to be in our own currency, you can see the protection strategically in the longer term that creates.
Now, moving on to the NHI, you indicated that you were also sent to a study in building the future health policy, which they studied there was that policy, planning, and financing. One, what is the current status of the health system, and what does NHI plan to achieve?
I mean, there's no dispute that given the resources that South Africa has, we should have been in a better position to produce better health outcomes, just with the resources that we have. There is no dispute that there is a significant maldistribution of resources. Maldistribution across the public-private divide, but also amongst the provinces. And we've not corrected for that. The third issue is that right from the beginning of the democratic dispensation, we might not have coined it as universal health coverage. but we always said our policy objective is is access of every South African citizen to good quality care. Okay. Now, sometimes I get a bit agitated when I hear people presenting this universal health coverage as if it's some new thing. That was fundamentally. So by presenting as a new thing, it deflects us in a sense, TJ, because it creates that we've come with a new idea, when in fact the question we should be asking, we had this as an idea from 1994. Why have we not executed successfully? Because if you take that view, you would approach this completely differently. Now, that takes us to the point. So the government concern, the public policy concern that these inequalities in health are unsustainable, they're incompatible with the notion of trying to build a stable democracy, that's illegitimate. Secondly, the policy objective of having universal health coverage, there's no dispute about that. I think every sensible South African, even people who benefit from the private sector who don't have problems of their own, I think, there's this thing about informed, enlightened self-interest should actually tell you that this is something that you should support, because especially if you know that your longer-term interests are going to be served by us having a far much more stable democracy, a workforce that is healthy, a workforce that is productive because it is healthy. So there's no question about that. And I think sometimes when we have this NHI debate, we create the impression that there are differences on things that there are no differences on. Then the second issue is then, if you want to go to national health coverage, what are your policy interventions? What is the NHI is one possible one. There are other policy interventions that are possible. But our government, our ruling party, legitimately, because there's nothing illegitimate, that's the nature of democracy. You've got the ruling party, it says, if you elect me, this is what I'm bringing to you. And then accept it by cabinet, and accept the principle of the NHI. Now, people can have different views about the NHI per se. But then where the difference comes, TJ, is that NHI itself, even when we've said it's NHI, there are different models of the NHI. You've got countries like Korea, Thailand, they've got versions of the NHI. I think where the difference is in the debate is that the version of the NHI that we have put in the bill is a version that pulls everything into the state as the center. Now, the theoretical logic for that is simply to say, in our constitution, health is a human right, and therefore the state must basically drive everything that's going on there. Now, there is a criticism of that. The criticism is that it does not correlate with reality. Because at the present time, you've got a relatively developed private sector. What you should be asking yourself, is there a way in which you could bring greater policy coherence between the public and the private sector? There are interventions in the private sector that are inefficient. A good example is this issue that Nicholas Crisp refers to, about that GPs would benefit from. That's a valid point, because in the structure of our system now, if my child sneezes, I can take my child to a pediatrician. And now, that's not the most efficient use of resources. Even countries that have established NHI have got some sort of a referral system where GPs act as the gatekeepers. And the GPs over time learn to know that if I see Ayanda and I refer him to the specialist will do what needs to be done and refer him back to me. At the present time, what's happening also is that GPs, even when they see you first, they hold on to you, even when they can't solve your problem, because if they release you to a specialist, the specialist holds you. You never come back. So there are distortions in the system that actually, in a strange way, Minister Mtswaledi instituted the Health Market Inquiry, which was led by Justice Sandile Ngcobo. And a lot of these things were laid bare there. So there is already a body of evidence-based interventions that can begin the journey of making sure that you remove the inefficiencies in the private sector and make the private sector far much more affordable, but leverage the assets that are there, leverage the expertise that is there, whilst you progressively grow the National Health Fund, the National Health Insurance Fund. And the other thing that I think people would disagree a bit with, that's where the debate is that if you look at other national health insurance systems, if you take the NHS in Britain, for example, there's no law that says you can't get this from wherever you want to get it from. But over the years, since the end of Second World War, they've built the credibility of the public system that people on their own start feeling that, no, man, there's no point in me paying twice, having a private cover on one level. And that is why, if you go to the UK, only 15% of the resources are in the private sector, whereas here close to 55% are in the private sector. And that's not something that has been enforced in law. It's basically simply the growth of the credibility of the system. And I think personally, if I had the last word on it, I would actually say the best way to build and energize that functions is to make everybody contribute to a common fund. If you decide in the short term you do not have faith that the public system is going to provide everything, as long as you've contributed, made some contribution to a common fund, you look after yourself, because accept that people are intelligent. At some point, they will feel that, no, man, what is being provided now in the public sector is, what's the point of me paying twice for a service that I already can get? But unfortunately, that's not how the law as it is framed. So the difficulty here is not the concept of the NHI. I think that's a correct move, but it's far much more the way we've crafted the law, and now which opens it also to some sort of litigation, which will delay the implementation. And so I think, nonetheless, I hope the South Africans and the Department of Health will find a very creative way of, even if there's delays, even if there's litigations that some sectors have already threatened on constitutional grounds. Even if that happens, we find a way to spend a bit of time saying, what is it that we can do jointly, collaboratively, because the system as is now does require urgent attention.
From a funding component, how would it be funded in its current model and in the model you'd suggest? So I know you said that contributing to a fund, everyone, but would that be in the form of additional tax? Would it come in VAT? Would it a special tax? How would you fund
it? Here we're making assumptions, TJ, precisely because what should have happened is that you should have had the National Health Insurance Bill, and side by side with it, you should have had a Treasury bill that basically tells you how this money is going to be. Because in terms of our Constitution, it's not the Minister of Health who can make those determinations, it's National Treasury. But because now we don't have that clarity, but we know intellectually that the state can only get money in a limited number of ways. And the simplest is to raise it through taxes, whether they are direct or indirect taxes. So we have to imagine that the fund, I know at the beginning people say we're just going to take the funds that are already in the system because Treasury does not have a scope and the appetite for increasing taxes now because of the challenges that we face. But I'm sure over time there would be some nominal tax that is supposed to augment this health fund. Now, where the difference is that the way the bill is crafted, it then says, once we start providing a service as this fund, you medical aids cannot provide the same service. That, to me, is a bit of a, I mean, I know the reasoning behind it is about human resources and contracting with human resources. But in the current macroeconomic environment, and in a country with such high levels of inequality, what you should be trying to do is to say to those who can afford, who are paying tax, make some contribution to this fund. If in the short term, you still want to provide for yourself, go and do, because all that would do, it increases the fund, the amount of funds that we have to deal with the people who really have got no options. And it would accelerate the process of us sorting out the public system. But for some reason, which I fear sometimes, I think is far much more ideological reason, we've opted for a option that says, at some point, the minister will make a declaration that this service is provided by the fund. Medical schemes cannot provide for. I just think that is not something personally I would legislate for. I would trust the judgment of individuals, because nobody wants to pay twice for the same service. And it would be, in fact, it would put pressure on the public system to move faster in terms of improving its performance. And it would act as a competition to the private sector. To me, the approach of then saying you are going to compel people is defeatist. It's as if the only way you can make people follow you is by enforcing them through law. Now that's not the way. Yeah. So that's the nuance, TJ. But even in spite of that nuance, I really believe that what we need to do is to galvanize as many South Africans across the public-private divide, reassure young professionals, because the uncertainty that this creates is pushing immigration at one level. Secondly, is making, quite frankly, medicine less attractive. Remember, side by side with that, we have increasing medical legal litigation in South Africa. So young people are beginning to just feel that this profession is probably not where I want to be, because I've got many other options. Fortunately, our democracy has opened up spaces that in the past, people would not even begin to think about.
Putting on your other cap, Discovery exec, the full implementation of the NHI, what would that mean for the Discovery and the lights?
Full implementation in the way the bill is structured would essentially say to Discovery, there are services that we are providing now that you should not provide by law. Okay, that's okay. Now, by the own admission of the health minister, you're talking 10 years down the line. So in fact, smart companies have got enough period to adjust. So if you hear companies complaining about the impact of that, it's not because of the short-term concerns, but it's actually because they are concerned about the signaling that is being given to investors far much more generally. Because who then is going to invest in the private health space now when there's a law lingering? It actually says the minister may, or the minister will at some point. Even the parameters on what is going to guide the minister to make the determination are not clear, except to say when the minister feels that there's full implementation. Now, people don't make investment on the basis of something so vague, and that is the problem. So sometimes, if you hear people like Discovery, certainly in the discussions I sit in Discovery, expressing reservations, strong reservations about the formulation of the bill, it's not even because they're concerned about the short-term concerns, because by the admission of people like Nicholas, Minister, and of course, the fact that the treasurer is not allocated in the medium term any significant resources, because the country simply cannot. So you know that in the short term, there's not going to be an impact. But what we might feel quite early on is investment diverting at a time when we actually need more investment into the country. So it's a signaling thing. That is what I think most people in the private sector actually to caution government. So just remember, when you make these policy decisions, There's a way in which investors think. And the fact that we in South Africa, we know the system and we start saying, no, it will take 10 or 12 years. When our people, let's say people in Discovery, when they're in a roadshow in London and talking to investors, the investors can't relate to that. They don't relate to that the government can pass a law and say, no, it will only have effect in 12 years' time. To them, they say, it's in the statute. So for as long as it's in the statute, it poses a risk. And my view is that even if government wanted to move that direction, I think personally I would have spent time building the credibility of the public system. And then, because, you can always amend laws anytime. And when you think what you're talking about would make sense and you can action it in the shortest possible space of time, then you change the law if that's the direction you want it to go. But I don't even think that direction was necessary personally. I'm in the fortunate position, TJ, is that I know, and I'm very careful about this because then people are going to say Ayanda is conflicted because it's work for Discovery. Fortunately, the NHI debates are old debates. We started this debate in 1997 in Mafeking. So the view I'm holding is the view I held as the Director General of Health. So in fact, the proposal that we had at that time was not about the national health insurance. It was about what we call the social health insurance. And SHI was more or less what I just described, where you compel people to contribute, but you allow coexistence of the public and the private sector. And then you build the capacity of the national fund. And when people have credibility in it, then people will then simply naturally not want to pay for services that they can get in a fund for which they've already been taxed. And that to me is that's the slight difference. So even as I said, even if my comrades criticize and say Ayanda is probably clouded because he's working in Discovery now, I have peaceful nights because actually that's a view I hold dearly, and I'm 64. I'm gonna be retiring anytime, and it's a view I will hold post-retirement. And one of the areas, by the way, I would love to devote a bit of my time at some point in is actually to make this work, because I really think the health system in South Africa currently structured, we just need many hands on deck, because the health system, as we conceived it right at the beginning, is one of those quick wins in the process of the restoration of dignity of South Africans. So the British knew it after the Second World War. People were hammered, people had gone through West, and there's a guy called Beveridge there. He came with this notion of building the NHS and said one of the things that we can do is to, as a way of making people recover, not just from the emotional trauma, from the physical trauma, is actually to build a system, a national health system in Britain. Now, that is, to me, philosophically, that's why I'm broadly supportive of and I have great sympathy for what forces the government to want to move on the NHI. It is not the concept itself, it's far much more the detail in the legislation that I have got aspects of. But unlike the people who probably take a view about spending all their time focusing on that difference, I take a view that says, let's find a creative way to work through that difference, but that should not stop us from doing what we have to do, which is to begin to see how we build these bridges and synergies so that we build a better system.
So with all of that said, as a citizen, should we be worried or happy about the NHI?
I think we should be happy that the government is taking a decisive move. I think we should also hope, in my view, we should also hope that the government will see that it is possible to move faster and implement without some of the provisions that it's put in the bill. That's my view. But the focus on health, both as a citizen, as somebody who's passionate about health, and from a health activist point of view, the fact that we've elevated health to be so central in the national debate, it's a good thing. And if we can get it right, it is one of those things that I actually think would really send a strong signal about a positive change in the country.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much for making time and educating us. Guys, hope it's been helpful, informative. We'll also just have either a short series or get someone to just outlay the NHI bill as a whole, so we have a fundamental understanding. But guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, tune in, same place, same time next week.